Why didn't they craft amphoras to stand up? What was the point of having a vessel with a pointed bottom? Okay, very good question. Now, to answer it, we need to look at the various types of amphora, because there were those which could stand up on their own. They had a flat bottom. We'll look at those in a moment. But what you're referring to are the transport amphora. So let's look at them and answer that question. So here we are then. This is a transport amphora. One of the types you're probably thinking, and I say types because there were many versions of these, depending when they were being made, what they were transporting, all sorts. So there are lots of different designs, and in fact you can get really into various rabbit holes looking at all the different variations of these. Now, what you've got here are the basic elements you'd associate with a transport amphora. You've got that large bulb in the middle, the sort of containing element, but then you've got those neck handles and you've got the pointed end, and it's the pointed end that you're probably looking at. But those neck handles I'll come to in a moment because they're actually quite interesting as well. So why do you have the pointed end bit? Why don't you have a flat bottom? Because as you'll see in a moment, we do have amphorae where they can stand up on their own. The answer to that is it's what their function is about. These are to be moved around. And if they're being moved around, the chances are they're not always on a stable surface to be stood up. And even if you could do that, would you want to? I mean, we can all think of those videos we've seen where one thing gets knocked over and everything gets knocked over. If you had, say, 20 of these stood up right next to each other, just takes one of them to go over, and you've got a lot of mess to clear up, and it would be expensive mess. So in a way, you didn't necessarily want these standing on their ends. However, the pointed ends, and some of them are really quite sharp. And what it's been suggested is that these could be planted in soft ground or sand, so they could temporarily stand up without a risk of falling over. Now I want to come to those neck handles, because on some of them you see big neck handles, which makes sense because you want to lift them, you want to pull them, you're doing all sorts. And sometimes they've got really small little almost loops. The idea is, and I think this is a fantastic idea, that when these were being transported by ship, they could be transported horizontally, but they could also be stood up. But how would they stand up exactly? Well, you wouldn't stand them up to balance on the end. That would be largely impossible. However, what you could do is have ropes going through those handles, and effectively you could have a large number of them having those guide ropes in the hold of the ship, so they'd all be sort of almost strung up against those ropes, and that's what would hold them up. So you could have perhaps the points touching the bottom, just to give them a bit more stability, but that would then help if the ship was moving and everything else. I think that's a really interesting idea, and yeah, seems very sensible to me. Now, when it comes to the other amphorae, they do have flat bottoms. Here we have quite a famous amphora, and as you can see, it's got that flat bottom. And the reason that it's got that flat bottom is because of its function. With the transport amphora, they're there to get something from A to B. This is to basically show off. This is the good china, as it were. And yeah, it might have held something, but the main purpose of this piece was as a piece of art. This was to showcase it. So you'd want it standing up so people could see it. And of course, you'd have it stood up in somewhere that you could be pretty certain wouldn't allow it to fall over, or so you'd hope. The only downside to that second type, as it were, of amphorae, the one with the wonderful images and art on them, is that they do tend to attract, well, weird types.